December the 18th, 2025, which happens to be my birthday, the UK government published its Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, a 10-year commitment to halve violence against women and girls by 2034. Within hours of it being published, online survivors were expressing that they've heard this before. Experts shared great vision, no coordination plan. And the National Audit Office had already warned coordination failure is why the 2021 strategy didn't work. I've spent decades reading and supporting strategies that get announced with great fanfare and applause and then quietly fail as if no one is paying attention. Strategies have given hope to individuals who've experienced things they shouldn't. But because there seems to be no consequences, because there's no accountability infrastructure to deliver it, these hopes are trampled on. So it's not surprising that some of the social feedback is cynical. When there is no mechanism to track who does what, when and with whom, no consequence when commitments drift, no structure to prevent responsibility from scattering across hundreds of organisations and disappearing, those responsible move on, and what was once a top priority is moved down the line of priorities as the new owner takes another top priority. Accountability is important, not to cast blame, but to track, align, and mobilise activities that aim to guarantee success. And it's why the 2025 Violence Against Women and Girls strategy is likely to come up short, just like the 2021 strategy did, unless something different is built. The same results will happen. This is Accountability Matters: Who Pays When Systems Don't. I keep coming back to this strategy because it was published on my birthday, so we're forever connected now. But seriously, I keep coming back to this strategy because I'm frustrated that what I see and what the National Audit Office had said about the lack of coordination, this massive element, this missing piece, is a costly gap. It's not theoretical, and many like me have and are still affected by the gap. And whilst it's frustrating to me, observing how I'm reacting to this, how I'm choosing to engage with it, I can see the work I've spent on healing to thrive is really coming through. Being able to lead with logic instead of just emotion, being able to offer wisdom, well, I hope wisdom, instead of just pain, I think that's a beautiful place to be. It doesn't mean the frustration isn't real, because it is, but it means I can channel it into something useful, not just this is broken, but this is broken and here's why, and here's what would fix it, and here's why I'm the person who can see it clearly. So that's why I keep coming back to this strategy, not because I'm stuck in anger, but because I've healed enough to lead from a place of informed concern, and that matters. Greetings. You're listening to Like Me Officially podcast. I'm JK. Thank you for being here and listening. This is where raw truths meet reflection, where I challenge social narratives, explore self-advocacy, and move beyond surviving life-changing experiences into courage, self-assurance, and thriving. Because if you're anything like me, you'll recognize that life is for living and living freely. Hashtag this is our time to thrive. And if this conversation resonates, please subscribe and share. It helps this podcast reach more people. And before I get into it, a quick note. In this episode, I will be exploring government coordination failures, institutional accountability, and patterns of system failure affecting those with lived experience of sexual violence and violence, including my own. If at any point you need to stop and take a breath or step away, please do. You matter more than this episode, and come back and listen only when you feel ready to. Now let's get into it. The accountability gap is the space between commitment and delivery. It's what happens after a strategy is shared publicly. The press conference ends, the applause dies down, and everyone goes back to their day jobs. It's the moment when there's a commitment to coordination, becomes someone else is probably handling that. Whole system response becomes 47 organizations doing unrelated and uncoordinated things. A 10-year strategy becomes, let's check back in 3 years. The National Audit Office identified this in their review of the 2021 Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. Weak coordination arrangements meant the government could not effectively monitor progress or hold partners to account. The translation: no one knew who was responsible for what, no one tracked whether commitments were delivered, and no mechanism existed to course correct when things drifted. 78% of commitments were delivered, and 22% of commitments just disappeared, and £22 million went underspent. And violence didn't decrease, it increased. Rape offences in 2012 were 16,000 per year, and rape offences in 2024 increased to 70,000 per year, 4 times higher. That's the accountability gap, not a policy failure, an infrastructure failure. The 2025 strategy makes the same promises. We will strengthen coordination across government and partners. But here's what they're not saying. There's no coordination infrastructure, no designated coordination body, no ongoing convening schedule, no tracking mechanism for shared commitments, no consequence or consequences when responsibility drifts. And let me show you what I think that looks like in practice. Here's a scenario. Prevention education in schools. The strategy commits to age-appropriate relationship and sex education. Who's responsible? The Department for Education, responsible for the curriculum. Ofsted, responsible for inspection standards. Individual schools, responsible for the delivery. Teacher training providers, educators are responsible for giving the training. NGOs are responsible for the program development. Parents, responsible for consent and involvement. So all those responsibilities, who will coordinate the communications, the feedback, the concerns, process reviews with these stakeholders? Coordination questions no one's answered. Who ensures all schools teach the same core messages? And who tracks whether teachers feel equipped to deliver this? Who coordinates between the Department of Education's guidance and the NGO resources? And who monitors whether prevention education actually changes attitudes? Who adjusts the approach when evidence shows something isn't working? Without coordination infrastructure, the Department for Education publishes guidance, tick commitment delivered. Some schools implement well, others don't. NGOs create resources that may or may not align with Department for Education's guidance, and teachers receive inconsistent training. No one's tracking outcomes across the system. And 3 years later, the response: we tried prevention education, it didn't work. But it's not the prevention education doesn't work, it's that uncoordinated prevention education doesn't work. This plays out across every commitment in the strategy. Perpetrator programs, who coordinates across probation, police, and health services. Specialist support, who ensures consistent standards across 300 plus local areas. Tech platform accountability, who holds Meta, TikTok, Pornhub to commitments. Coordination isn't a nice to have, it's the infrastructure that makes strategies deliverable, and the UK doesn't have it yet. Now, that might sound abstract. Coordination, infrastructure, shared commitments, decision-making spaces. So let me show you what this could actually mean in practice. What does coordination failure actually look like for survivors and those with lived experience? Not on a spreadsheet with an ID or name, a real person. Another scenario, a survivor reports sexual violence. She goes to the police, Department 1. They take a statement, say they'll investigate, tell her not to talk to anyone else about it while the case is active. She needs mental health support, Department 2. NHS waiting list is 6 to 9 months. crisis line says, "Have you reported to the police?" The IAPT won't see her until criminal case is resolved, which might trigger trauma responses that affect evidence. She needs time off work. Department 3, HR asks for documentation. Police can't provide it because it's an active investigation. She has to choose. Disclose details to employer or possibly lose income or be reprimanded within the workplace. She contacts the Sexual Violence Support Service department. They're funded by a different local authority. Their crisis advocacy is full. They refer her to another service. That service asks her to retell her story again. 4 months later, police investigation stalls due to lack of evidence, so they're still investigating. Mental health support still unavailable. She might have lost her job. She might have been forced to take time off work or overworks to hide her stress. By now, she's retold her story 6 times to 6 different organisations. None of them are talking to each other. This is what coordination failure looks like, not in a strategy document, in a person's life. If you've experienced this, the retelling, the waiting, the gaps, it hurts. Hearing other people tell your story their way, it hurts. The isolation hurts. Feeling like you were failing at getting help hurts. That pain is real and valid. When I reported, I experienced this. The isolation, the retelling, the "we can't help you until X department does Y." And I thought, I'm failing at getting help. But I wasn't failing. The system was failing me because no one was coordinating. If coordination infrastructure existed, police, mental health services, employers, and support organisations would be able to share information appropriately with the survivor's consent. And they'll be able to coordinate timelines so that individual isn't stuck in limbo. And it ensures that they don't retell their trauma 6 times, create warm handoffs, not cold referrals. One person, one coordinated response. That's what accountability infrastructure could actually deliver. Not policy documents, not strategy commitments, coordinated support for the person in front of you. That's why this matters. When I experienced this, I thought it was just me, that I'd somehow failed at navigating the system. Then I realised that this wasn't unique to me. It was a pattern. And here's what I need to be clear about. This isn't just about my experience. When I talk about coordination failure, the retelling of trauma to multiple services, the gaps between police, mental health, housing, legal support, the "we can't help you until X department does Y," that's not unique to me. That's the pattern across hundreds of thousands of survivors' experiences every year for decades. The National Audit Office documented it. The 2021 Strategy Review confirmed it. Survivor advocacy organisations report it consistently. Research studies validate it. Coordination failure isn't an individual experience. It's a systemic pattern. My experience is one data point. But when you understand the pattern across 7,000 reported rape cases annually, hundreds of thousands accessing domestic abuse services, tens of thousands navigating stalking, harassment, FGMC support, decades of survivors before me who experienced the same gaps. That's not anecdotal, that's structural. And this is the thing that really matters. Individual stories create empathy. Patterns create accountability. When one survivor says, "the system failed me," that's tragic. That's worth addressing. When hundreds of thousands of survivors experience the same coordination failures, that's not tragedy, that's design. And this is what's interesting. Research shows organizations often justify broken coordination systems to protect institutional legitimacy. It's easier to say we're doing our part than to admit the way we're all working together isn't working. Each organization can point to their individual deliverables. Each can attribute gaps to other organizations' circumstances. Each can avoid confronting that the collective system isn't working. But when pattern recognition shows coordination failure across multiple organizations, when the National Audit Office documents it, when survivor organizations report it consistently, when the pattern is undeniable across hundreds of thousands of experiences, individual institutions can't dismiss it anymore. The pattern makes system failure undeniable. So when I advocate for coordination infrastructure, I'm not saying build this so my experience improves. I'm saying build this because the pattern across hundreds of thousands of experiences proves the current design doesn't work. My experience taught me to recognize the pattern. Understanding the pattern is what creates leverage to demand infrastructure change, not for me, but for the hundreds of thousands still navigating this system, and the hundreds of thousands who will have to navigate the system if we don't change it. Understanding the pattern is powerful, but understanding alone doesn't fix it. So what would actually work? Not vague promises to improve coordination, but specific practical mechanisms. Not theory, practical mechanisms. Designated coordination spaces, regular structured convenings that bring together decision holders across government departments with violence against women and girls mandates, national charities delivering services, local authorities implementing locally, corporate platforms with prevention responsibilities, survivors with lived experiences informing practice, not networking events, decision-making spaces where coordination gaps are surfaced. The Department for Education guidance contradicts what police are teaching in schools about consent. Refuge funding cycles don't align with service delivery needs, and tech platforms aren't meeting their commitments on harmful content. Survivors are retelling trauma 6 times because services don't coordinate, and the responsibility isn't clarified, like who's fixing this? What decision needs to be made by when? Who else needs to be involved? How do we know when it's resolved? And the frequency, quarterly minimum, because coordination drift happens in the gaps between annual reviews. The other thing is shared commitment tracking, a live, accessible tracker showing what each organisation's committed to, their progress across these commitments, the barriers blocking delivery, dependencies between organisations, not a compliance checklist, a coordination tool. For example, if the commitment is all rape survivors receive specialist support within 24 hours of reporting, the Home Office is responsible for the funding, the police will be responsible for the referrals, the NHS responsible for crisis care, and sexual violence support services responsible for specialist support. The status of all of this delayed. Why? Because the police don't have to update referral pathways. Sexual violence support services in 40% of areas have 3-week waiting lists. And the coordination needs of the Home Office to convene police and support services to align referral processes and address capacity gaps. This makes invisible coordination failures visible and prevents we didn't know there was a problem 2 years later. Another thing is consequence through visibility. Research from the Institute for Government shows only 40% of major government programs deliver successfully. Coordination failure is the primary factor. The UK's Major Projects Authority found projects with formal coordination mechanisms were 2.7 times more likely to be delivered on time and on budget than those relying on assumed coordination. Implementation researchers found that even well-funded evidence-based programs failed 86% of the time due to lack of coordination infrastructure. The National Audit Office has documented this pattern across sectors. Without designated coordination bodies, shared tracking and accountability mechanisms, strategies drift. And it's not that people don't care, it's that without infrastructure, coordination doesn't happen. And when commitments are shared across 50 organisations, for example, it's easy to assume someone else is handling it. It's easy to deprioritise when other urgent work appears. And it's easy to deliver 80% and call it done. Accountability infrastructure creates consequences throughout. transparency. The process of, or lack of it, is visible to peers and stakeholders. And there's peer accountability, where organizations can see what others are delivering and hold each other to standards and maybe even support each other. Police accountability. Summary reports show collective progress without naming and shaming. And decision forcing mechanisms like convenings end with clear who, what, when, rather than we'll discuss this more. The consequence isn't punishment. The consequence is visibility, and visibility changes behaviour. These aren't radical ideas. This is how successful multi-stakeholder coordination works in other contexts. Research on cross-sector collaboration shows networks without formal coordination mechanisms have 3 times higher failure rates. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, an international organization that develops policy standards, found that strategies involving multiple levels of government fail 60% of the time without quarterly coordination convenings and shared data platforms. The pattern is consistent across sectors. Coordination infrastructure determines whether strategies succeed or fail. So how do we know coordination infrastructure is working? I think success would look like coordination gaps surfaced and addressed within 1 quarter, not discovered in annual reviews. Survivors reporting to services in coordinated areas retell their story once, maybe twice, rather than 6 times. Annual strategy reviews show 90% plus commitment delivery, not 78%. That's a difference infrastructure makes. So why it doesn't exist in the current strategy? There are 3 reasons which I found. 1 is expensive. Coordination infrastructure costs money. Quarterly convenings, independent facilitation, tracking systems, staff time across organizations. The 2025 strategy allocates 20 million for challenging harmful attitudes, but no specific budget for coordination infrastructure. Because education programs are easier to fund than accountability mechanisms, I suppose. Education has outputs you can measure. We trained X teachers. Coordination has outcomes that merge over time. Departments stopped working at cross purposes. Governments prefer funding things they can count. 2, it requires admitting current approaches don't work. Building accountability infrastructure means saying previous strategies failed not because we didn't care, but because we didn't coordinate effectively. We're building different infrastructure this time. That's politically uncomfortable. It's easier to say we're strengthening coordination, which is a vague response, than to say we're establishing quarterly decision maker convenings with independent facilitation and public progress tracking, because the 2021 strategy's coordination failed, which is a specific admission. And 3, it creates visibility no one wants. Accountability infrastructure makes it obvious who's delivering and who's not. Government departments don't want that visibility. Organizations don't want to be publicly called out for missing targets. Everyone prefers the cover of collective responsibility. We all failed. It's easier than we specifically failed at X while others delivered Y. So the accountability gap persists, not because we didn't know how to fix it, but because fixing it requires courage. So if institutions won't build this on their own, what now? This is where institutional self-accountability comes in. Institutional self-accountability is when organizations proactively ask questions like, are we coordinating effectively with others working on this? Do we know if our work is creating gaps for the people we serve? Are we tracking whether our commitments are actually improving experiences? Not waiting for external audits to reveal coordination failures, not assuming someone else is handling coordination, but building accountability into how they operate from the start. When I reported, I thought, I must be doing this wrong. Why is it so fragmented? But learning that 70,000 others report annually, most experience the same fragmentation. The National Audit Office has documented coordination failure. The 2021 strategy failed to address this, and my experience wasn't unique. It was predictable. The shift from what's wrong with me to what's wrong with the system, that's pattern recognition. And pattern recognition is power, because this is about how experiences are improved. It's horrible to think that rape offences could double to 140,000 annually by 2034 if this strategy doesn't work or is implemented in a haphazard way. That's not abstract. That's 70,000 more people experiencing retelling their trauma multiple times because services don't coordinate. Falling through gaps between agencies, navigating fragmentation that's been documented for decades. Institutional self-accountability asks, what do we know now that could improve their experience? What infrastructure was missing that should exist for them? How can we use our understanding to prevent them from falling through the same gaps? I can't control whether the government builds coordination infrastructure, but in my own way I can make it impossible for them to look me in the eye and say, we didn't know coordination was missing. We didn't know survivors needed this. No one told us what accountability infrastructure looks like. And that's why I think this episode is important, because, and what it's about, is about making it impossible for ignorance to be the excuse when the strategy fails. And here's what I do know about coordination infrastructure, what it looks like structurally and why its absence causes harm, how its presence would improve experiences. And I'm putting that knowledge on record, not for my sake, but for theirs. Because if violence doubles instead of halves, and someone asks, why did this fail? The answer won't be, we didn't know. It will be, we knew, and we chose not to build it. That's accountability. If you are a survivor, or prefer the term one with lived experience, and you've experienced the retelling, the gaps, the fragmentation, it wasn't your fault. The system failed at coordinating, which has been documented across hundreds of thousands of experiences. And understanding that might help, even if it's just a little bit. And if someday you choose to advocate more for yourself and for others, you now have language, coordination infrastructure, instead of things should be better. The patterns affects hundreds of thousands instead of just me. Some have found it helpful to ask up front, do you coordinate with other services I might need? Not because they have to, but because knowing helps them decide whether they have the capacity, mentally and emotional, for fragmented support and what they need to do for themselves to help them through the situation. And if you're working in the space of violence against women and girls, in whatever capacity, when individuals share their lived experiences, don't just seek to document the individual stories, also look for the pattern. Because one person saying, I've already told my story 6 times, is feedback. 600 individuals saying it is evidence of coordination failure. And when you advocate to your superiors, your leaders, people of influence, lead with patterns. Survivors consistently report retelling trauma to multiple uncoordinated services. This isn't individual casework failure, it's structural coordination failure. I'll say it again, the National Audit Office has confirmed this. Build coordination infrastructure. Individual stories create empathy, patterns create accountability. You need both. But patterns are what force infrastructure change. And if you're listening as a funder, a government department head or leader or decision maker, I'm sharing what's needed, Coordination infrastructure is buildable. We know it works. The question is whether it gets built before the 2027 review confirms the 2025 strategy is on track to fail for the same reason the 2021 strategy did. On December the 18th, 2025, the UK committed to halving violence against women and girls in 10 years. That's 3,650 days from the date of publication. If this strategy succeeds, 35,000 fewer people annually will experience violence. Thousands will receive coordinated support instead of fragmented services. The pattern of coordination failure will finally have been broken. If the strategy fails like 2021 did, 70,000 annual offences becomes 140,000, and 70,000 more people, hundreds of thousands, have experienced. I can design a coordination infrastructure, but I can't force institutions to build it. So I'm doing what I can, sharing what's needed, making it impossible for them to say we didn't know, and raising awareness that the pattern exists, not so survivors feel responsible for fixing it, but so when it fails again, and it might, we all know it wasn't because the solution didn't exist. It's because a choice was made not to build it. The 2025 strategy will be reviewed in 2027. The pattern will either be on track to be broken or it will continue. I'm doing what I can, and I will continue to share my thoughts as things progress. And it will be great for you to be part of the journey. So please subscribe to the podcast and share it. This has been Accountability Matters, Who Pays When Systems Don't. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to this episode of Like Me Podcast. If anything I've shared has made you stop, think, or see yourself just a little bit clearer, fantastic. I love this for you. I love this for me. And honestly, I love this for us. And if this episode shifted something in you, give yourself a moment to sit with it. And if anything felt a little bit too heavy, speak to someone you trust. What I've learnt is that we don't heal in isolation, and you don't have to carry any of this alone. This space isn't about staying in survival mode. It's about lifting ourselves out of the dimension that has tried to keep us trapped and choosing a version of ourselves that's still becoming. If this resonates with you, share with someone who might need a reminder or a friend. And make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss the next episode. I'm JK. Stay open, stay self-curious, and remember, it's our time to thrive.